Good morning, Year 4. So for this lesson you will need a large piece of paper, or I've chosen cards here, and you'll need a range of colours, so they can be felt tips or anything you have really. The best thing that you can do is get ones with a very fine nib on. The finer the easier you'll find for your writing what we're going to do. So we're going to create something that is called a Wordle. Okay, so a Wordle is a collection of words or phrases that are presented in a slightly different way than you normally would. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a Wordle that was about Edward and about his character. So you've got to start thinking about words that would describe what Edward was like, his personality. On the right hand side down here, or on another piece of paper would be even better, I want you to write down at least 10 words that described Edward at the start of the story. So I'm going to think of 4, but I want you to think of at least 10. The more words the better. So I'm going to go with the word selfish. He was definitely a selfish person. I'm going to go with the word grand. He was very grand. He liked his exquisite clothes. I'm going to go with the word listener. Not because he was a good listener, but because it's an interesting trait throughout the story. I'm going to go with the word thinker. So he was a thinker, wasn't he? He would think about the stars, and he would think about what people said to him and how they said it to him. So I've got 4 words here that describe Edward in some way, but I want you to do at least 10. The more words the better. I would do 10, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. Now, a Wordle. I am now going to think of these words in regard to Edward and how much are they true of Edward. Now, the word selfish, at the start of the story, Edward was incredibly selfish, wasn't he? He was very selfish. So I'm going to write this word in my Wordle, and because he was incredibly selfish, I'm going to write it quite large. Okay, so I'm going to use some of my calligraphy skills here to write this word in a nice font. There we go. So I've got the word selfish. Again, like I say, it's quite large because at the first part of the story, Edward was really selfish. So I'm going to look at the word listener next. Listener. Now, at the start of the story, Edward wasn't really a good listener. He did listen to what people said, but he wasn't a really good listener, was he? So because he wasn't a very good listener, I'm going to do this word smaller, because the bigger the words, the more they stand out, the more you associate with the character. He wasn't a good listener, so I'm going to do that smaller. Now I'm going to turn my page and I'm going to do that word in a different direction. And this is what makes a Wordle quite interesting. So I'm going to do the word listener. There. Okay. Right, so I've done listener. And they're going in different directions. That's what makes these Wordles interesting. Right, thinker. He was a thinker. Definitely was. So I'm going to make that somewhere in between these 2 words. So not as big as selfish, but not as small as listener. And I'm going to turn my page this way. I'm going to go diagonally down here. So a little bit bigger than listener, but not as big as selfish. There we go. Okay, my last word is the word grand. Well, he was incredibly grand, wasn't he? So grand should really be as big as selfish, I'm looking around to see what space I've got. I've got a bit of space in here. Which direction do I want to go in? Do I want to go across? Do I want to go up? Do I want to go maybe diagonal? Maybe diagonal down here would work well. So I'll turn my paper the other way, and I'm thinking, actually I've got to think where my D is going to end up. So I want my D to end up in there, don't I? So I'm going to do my D first, actually. I'm going to go D there. Then I want grand to go along here. So I want my N to be there. Going to go A. And then I'm going to go an R. And then I'm going to do my G there. So I've created my first Wordle to describe Edward at the start of the story. It's really a piece of art, and all these words interlock to tell me about Edward's character. He was very grand, he was very selfish, he listened a little bit, and he was a bit of a thinker. Once I've done that one Wordle, I'm going to get a fresh piece of paper or card, and I'm going to do a second Wordle that is about Susanna. Okay, so some of those words will stay the same. I do think Susanna was still selfish because of how he acted when he was given the high chair, and since there was still that element of old Edward. I think that he maybe still wanted to be grand. And then the listener was interesting because he changed as a listener, didn't he? He became much more of a listener. And then I would say he was still a selfish one. So at the start of the story, Edward was very selfish, so I did that really big. I would say actually, when he became Susanna, he was less selfish. So I'm going to do that much smaller actually. I don't think it completely went, but I do think he was much less selfish, so I'm going to do that smaller. There we go. Grand, well that's interesting as well, because he wasn't very grand towards the end, was he? So again, I'm going to put it in a different position this time. I'm going to put it here. So he wasn't very grand at all. He didn't have those posh clothes on. He wasn't expected to be called Edward Tulane all the time. He didn't mind being called it anymore. Listener. Now, on my first one, I did listener quite small because I didn't think he was a very good listener. However, I think as Susanna, he started to actually really listen to Nellie. So I think listener needs to be much larger this time. So I'm going to do it much bigger. There we go. And then thinker, I think he was still quite a good thinker. I'm going to do that diagonally. I'm going to do it diagonally across here this time. There's a nice line that those two words match up on. So I'm going to do thinker, quite large again. Oh, I want it a bit swirlier. There. So thinker. So again, these four words combine together to show me Susanna's personality. Susanna is a big thinker and listener. A little bit selfish, but not much. And a little bit grand, but not much. Whereas Edward at the start was really selfish and really grand and not a very good listener. So what I'm looking for today is that change between the two characters. Hopefully you can see that it becomes more interesting with more words. With 4 words it's actually quite hard to do this, but with more words you'll have words going at diagonals here, words going down, words going off, like a big game of Scrabble, I suppose. Try and use different colours and make it more interesting. If you want to, try my cursive handwriting, my calligraphy that I've tried, but you don't have to. Okay, so that is a Wordle.